There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin.
Hello and welcome to this commemorative encore program on the rise and fall of the Berlin Wall. My name is Songa Samuel Stone. This year, events have taken place around the world to mark the construction of the Berlin Wall. More than 60 years ago, about 9,000 kilometers away from where I stand, Kampala, Uganda's capital city, a wall was built. A wall that separated a nation and caused so much pain and suffering to families and loved ones. The Berlin Wall was the hallmark of exclusion. It excluded people socially and economically. It equally caused a lot of suffering for so many people. And yet, 28 years later, in 1989, history tells us that change is possible. People wanted to determine their own destiny, and they were successful. You may ask or wonder, why this discussion on the Berlin Wall here in Uganda? After all, we don't have a wall separating one part of the country from another. Why is this discussion relevant? Well, the Berlin Wall was not only a physical but also part of a political, military and ideological barrier, a barrier that we know today as the Iron Curtain. In fact, it became its most well-known symbol and therefore a symbol of the Cold War, dividing the world in a Western and Eastern bloc. The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tensions between the Western bloc, led by the United States of America, and the Eastern bloc, led by the Soviet Union. Both of them defending their ideas and their ways of life and seeking alliances worldwide, including with countries here in Africa. This worldwide competition didn't leave anyone aside. The Berlin Wall, built to preserve an ideological system that already, at the time of its construction, was losing its supporters, became first a symbol of oppression and injustice, and then, 28 years later, all of a sudden, a symbol of hope, freedom, and democracy. Over the next 50 minutes, we take you back to a panel discussion held on NBS television on the rise and fall of the Berlin Wall. Our panelists, the Ugandan human rights lawyer Nicholas Opio, and from Germany, Dr. Anna Kaminski and Hans von Schroeder. The conversation was moderated by Anna Reisman, the country director of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Uganda and South Sudan.
Dear Anna Kaminski, could you please share with us the historical perspective and what are these internal difficulties and the pressure that Adenauer was referring to? And bringing the discussion from the historical perspective to the present. Your book on the Berlin Wall in the world, what are your findings and what do they teach us? Thank you again for being with us today, and the floor is yours, and I hope we will also be able to listen to you here in the studio. Thank you.
Yeah, Anna Reisman, dear participants in the panel, I would like to thank you for the invitation to share, to be part of this podium today, because today this is a very special day for not only for us living in Berlin, but also for Germany and Europe and the whole world, because on this day it was a massive demonstration of what communist regimes were able to do to their populations. On this day, on the 13th of August, 1961, it means from now on 60 years ago, in the early morning, the German capital, Berlin, was divided by a 167 kilometers long wall, so-called construction, as now known today as a wall. And this wall divided the city between 1961 and 1989 for over 28 years in two parts. in Brenner's presentation, we have seen a part of the wall in which it was possible to see how Berlin was divided. In the western parts, ruled by the former Western allies from World War II, they installed a democratic regime and democratic rules. And in the eastern part, where I grew up after the war, this part was ruled by a communist dictatorship under Soviet reign. Now you would have seen some pictures from the construction of the wall and how Berlin's situation was in 1961, 1962. Sure. This is a wall which divided Berlin for over 28 years. And what you can see, it's, most of the people then did not know or suspect that in 1961, in high summertime, East German regime would close the last loophole for an escape to the west. It was summertime and most of the people enjoyed their holidays. So wherever they were surprised by the news that communist regime had closed Berlin border. As you may know, there was another borderline. It was a borderline between Germany West and Germany East. And this borderline already had been closed in 1952. So after 1952, Berlin remained the last loophole for an escape to the west. Until 13th of August, already 4 million people had fled the GDR. It was 1/4 of population, which counted by 20 million before the escapes. But why did they escape? And we have heard the sentences from Konrad Adenauer. A lot of them were longing for life, for self-determined life in freedom, but a lot of them also had the unspecified wish for a better life. East German communists declared the wall was necessary to save world peace, and the wall was called the Anti-Fascist Protective Wall. But as you might have seen in one of the former pictures here, you can see, and if you have a look on the different elements of the wall, you can easily see that it was directed against the eastern side. All border measures were used to prevent escapes, with, on one hand side, an unsurmountable stone block obstacle which formed a 2-walled barrier in between a death trap, with a wide range net of informers of secret police Stasi, which should inform about all thoughts and plans of escaping, and also with a system of intimidation and fear that told people, you can't get out here, and if you try, you will be shot. The wall was not only a building or a construction, it was not only a political demonstration and a message. It was the most visible sign and symbol of lack of freedom and human rights, and became the symbol for the moral defeat of the communist dictatorships in Europe. No other building in Germany and maybe in Europe in the second half of the 20th century had such harsh consequences for so many people. Millions of families were separated for decades and some forever. But even that there was a death risk trying to escape, 10,000 of people tried. And only 140 died at the Berlin Wall, and hundreds more died by trying to escape via the German borderline. The last victim, which were shot at the Berlin border, was the 18 years young Chris Geffroy, who tried to overcome the wall in February 1989. And more than 30,000 people were arrested, most of them hurt by trying to escape. And even more were imprisoned only by being suspected to plan to escape.
Nicholas, your work as human rights defender is very well known, and it's highly recognized by so many, but it's also criticized and not quite welcomed by some. You know that I personally belong to the admirers of what you do, and I have my greatest respect for the voice of conscience you are. You are, just to name a few recognitions of your work, recipient of the European Parliament Sakharov Fellows Prize. Andrei Sakharov, after whom this prize is named, was a Russian nuclear physicist. He himself was a Nobel Prize laureate and one of the most known human rights activists in the Soviet Union. And we remember that that was the power that led the Eastern Bloc. Interestingly enough, is that a fragment of the Berlin Wall can now be found just in front of the Sakharov Center in Moscow, in Russia. You are also recipient of the German Africa Prize. And I may quote from the speech of German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier on the occasion of awarding this prize to you. And he said, and I quote, "Nicolas Opio, you have demonstrated more than just the courage to stand up for democracy. You have demonstrated your unconditional love for democracy." And of course, the recognition of your work continues in the original speech, but allow me to stop here. Nicholas, we are all aware that love for democracy sometimes comes at a high personal cost. And I believe that the Berlin Wall is a symbol for it. What does it mean to you personally? And please help us also maybe now bring this discussion closer to Uganda and the work you do. Why do you think this historical event plays a role or has a relevance for Ugandans? Thank you again for having immediately responded to our invitation and your willingness to participate in this discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna, and to the other guests for sharing this evening together. I have had the rare privilege of traveling to Berlin and touching what's left of the wall. I have a fragment in my house of what I believe is a rock that was taken from the wall. Alongside the Berlin Bear, they sit in my house as a constant reminder of that emotional day when I touched what was left of the wall in Berlin. The Berlin Wall represents simultaneously the very worst of humanity and the very best of humanity. That there are times in the history of our countries when a section of that country can do certain really vile things against others. The construction of that wall represents that very worst instincts in human beings. But it also represents hope that if a few people stand up for the truth peacefully, principally, over a long period of time, no evil can triumph over good. That the basic principles that underpin a liberal democratic order has an enduring presence in the hearts of human beings. And that if people work together, walls can fall. Walls can fall. In contemporary Uganda, one might ask, what does the construction of a wall 60 years ago mean? I think it represents, in my view, three things. First, that we must confront our dark past as opposed to revisit it if we are to move forward as a country and as a people. The peoples of Germany admit what has happened and they are proud to represent that future, not as an inspiration for anything evil, but as a reminder to the generations next that they should never go back to that time again. So we must confront our past. Unless we confront our past and come to terms with it, we may not be able to have sustainable peace and a democratic society. This country has had its own wars, its own dark episodes in the past. But I don't think we have come together to reckon with that past. We have instead involved in an enterprise of revisionism, telling the victor's story. But I think we must confront that dark past and admit it candidly if we're to learn lessons from it going forward. The second thing that it represents for our country, that the Berlin Wall may have fallen, but there are many walls, invisible as they may be, that are being constructed in our society. The walls of exclusion, the walls of iniquity and inequality, the walls of poverty. And we must all commit ourselves and be inspired by what happened in Berlin 28 years ago and the years before, to come together peacefully to work towards breaking those walls. There are too many invisible walls around us as a country, as a people. Whether you talk about women's rights, you talk about poverty, we must break those walls of iniquity to have a democratic society where everybody can realize their full potential. The third one is that we must, as a society, take inspiration from the deep commitment of the people who sacrifice their time, their resources to ensure that they work towards the dismantling of the wall, but do so peacefully. Oftentimes, people are given to violence or violent demonstrations out of a sense of frustration. But the history of the Berlin Wall shows that persistence, working peacefully, will in the end deliver sustainable results and ensure a peaceful society. The Berlin Wall must inspire us to do similarly in this country. To be patient, to show the good values of a democratic society, and that these values have an enduring presence in the hearts of so many Ugandans who wish well for their country.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you very much for these insights. So I'm taking three aspects. It's confront the past, learn from the past, coming to terms with the past. It's working and breaking down the walls of exclusion, but most importantly, doing it peacefully.
Yeah.
Because only doing it peacefully will ensure a sustainability to the results and create a democratic society. And I think these were also your findings, saying diplomacy. Diplomacy is the way to overcome barriers, to solve problems, to confront also maybe authoritarian regimes as we did it in our own past. Let me try to bring back into our discussion Anna Kaminsky, because the institutions that you're directing, you, in the core of your work is this confronting the past, coming to terms with the past, but you also work a lot with young people. Why is it? Why do you have young people, young population as a target of your work? Maybe you could share this with us and share also the findings when it comes to the Berlin Wall in the world and why other countries display fragments of the Berlin Wall in their streets, in front of their institutions. Thank you.
Our foundation, we were founded by German Parliament, and it was in a time when a lot of people said, oh, dictatorship and division of the country. It's almost 10 years, and we don't want to look back. We have to look forward. And we always said, but it is our life. It's a life of our parents, of our grandparents. It's a life of this country. And if we forget about the past, it is not possible to go over that. And every year we have new generations. which don't have experiences with the dictatorship in Germany, at least, which don't have experiences with German division. A lot of young people who come to Berlin, the first question they ask is, but where's the wall? And we have to say, you will hardly find traces and remainings of the wall in Berlin. Most of that is not visible again in our days. So it is very hard to explain to them why it was not possible to know fathers or mothers or grandparents, or to visit each other, because most of the people which come today to Berlin, for instance, they have the impression, they have the experience of a borderless world, at least in Europe. So what we have here in Germany, we have also the point that after 1990, there was in 1989, with the peaceful revolution, with all the changes, with all this was combined and connected with a lot of hopes. And in the early years after German unification, a lot of these hopes were disappointed and were replaced by disappointments because the expectations were so high. So the experiences from the after revolutionary, the after dictatorship times, the experiences from the transformation process are transforming the memories of dictatorship. And what we try in our foundation is to explain, what does it mean to live in a dictatorship? What does it mean to lack of democratic rights, to lack of freedom? And you may know that at least in Europe and in Germany, the corona restrictions were very hard. So in the last 18 months, we had also to face discussions about situation now is like in the GDR. We are living in a GDR 2.0, or we are living in a corona dictatorship. And all these are discussions and arguments we are using to talk to people and to say, okay, let's discuss that. Is it really the same situation? What do you know about dictatorship? What do you know about communist rule in Germany?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would also like to ask you, when you were traveling across the globe, working on your book, what would people tell you? Why did they want to have the fragment of the wall in their country?
Most of the stories I found were stories of hope. For instance, in Korea, you know that Korea is still a divided country. So in Korea, a lot of pieces of the wall were put in memorials, and nearly all these memorials are reminding that Korea is still a divided country, and there are always memorials of hope that also in Korea might happen the same what happened in Germany. Or we have a lot of pieces which are combined with religious content. They are used as reliquaries, as relics, as religious relics, like in Fatima. This is a pilgrimage locality where in 1917, Maria appeared to 3 children and predicted historical events from the 20th century. And it is said that Maria also said that there will be a communist regime, and in 1989 this communist regime will break down, will collapse. So they put there a piece of the Berlin Wall as a religious reliquary, and the Pope went there to bless this part of the Berlin Wall. But in most of the cases, what I found is that these pieces of the wall, that Berlin became a symbol of freedom, and that borders might be overcome by peaceful means, and a symbol of hope. Yeah.
Thank you so much. A symbol of hope, a symbol of peace, a symbol of struggling for liberty, for freedom, for democracy. From the experience that you have, Hans von Schröder, traveling the world, do you still feel the impact of this wall in other regions of the world? Let's start with Europe. Do we feel the impact or the consequences of this dividing wall between two different political systems, two different ideologies? Do we still find the impacts of that wall?
I would say, of course, and we see these impacts, these consequences of the events in '89 in all parts of the world globally. It's like a huge meteorite that has impacted Earth, and now you find the shatters all around. Just to give you some examples, starting in Germany, although 31 years have passed, we are still experiencing differences between mindsets, attitudes, but also livelihoods of people in the eastern part and the western part of Germany. 31 years after different German governments have invested billions of euros. Companies have invested a lot of money in the eastern part, and a lot of things have considerably changed. People earning much more money in the east, but they're still lagging behind the western part. There are also other differences in attitude which have been investigated quite thoroughly, I think last year on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the fall of the wall. They can be read there. They are there. So what do we learn from it? It takes maybe more time to overcome these differences than the fact or the process of separation itself, which was in the case of the GDR a little bit over 40 years. So I think in Germany we will still grappling with the consequences of the wall for the next generation. And looking a little further, of course, the fall of the wall was only the beginning or the centerpiece maybe of ending the Cold War. Other barriers came down. Europe opened up. The European Union grew considerably. New peace treaties were concluded even between arch enemies like the US and the USSR, or later Russia. These were very, very positive developments. But also talking about Latin America, which was my personal first experience abroad as a diplomat, there were still rebel organizations with a communist background. Of course, they were supported by the Eastern Bloc, but right after the fall of the wall, a peace process started, which was very slow, and it took another 15 years, for example, in Colombia, to really come to a peace agreement. And of course, we would also find in Africa examples where nations were divided from each other because they were under different influences. And then after the end of the Cold War, things developed in a positive direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think it's impressive to just look back into the history, but see the consequences in the present. And what you are describing, generations after already the collapse also of the Berlin Wall, that you can still feel the difference in the mentalities and the attitude, although new generations grew up. Now this brings me to a very particular thought. And I would like to share it also with our audience and also with the audience that is watching us outside of Uganda. Uganda is one of the youngest countries in the world. In fact, it ranks second youngest, with 55% of the population being under the age of 18. So again, for most of them, this is just part of history. Most of them wouldn't even know, but I guess if given the opportunity to travel, they would maybe see, notice the impacts. I have to come back to Konrad Adenauer, because young people were actually one of his main concerns when the construction of the Berlin Wall started. And I would like to quote from his speech from 19th of August, 1961, just 6 days after the beginning of the construction of the wall. And I quote, in 16 years, this is the time frame that he's referring to between the end of the Second World War and the beginning of the construction of the Berlin Wall. So in 16 years, over 3.5 million have made their way to the West. For the past 16 years, young people especially have fled in large numbers, and in the last few years in particular. As the generation has grown up, over which the rulers of the zone, this is how Konrad Adenauer refers to the Eastern Germany, have had influence almost from early childhood. Over 50% of the refugees have been young people under the age of 25. So now here being in the young society and also looking back into 1961 and imagining that the most people who fled the country back then grew up in that country, that they didn't also know and weren't born during the Second World War. And still, although they didn't know anything else, but their life in the GDR, they wanted to flee. So what, Nicholas, what does it tell us when we educate our young populations, when we give them chances to shape the life in the way they would like to live it?
Uganda as a nation is a very young country. The vast majority of our population are very young people. Young people represent the future. In local terms, they are the rising sun, the promise of the future. But that promise has to be harnessed for it to represent tangible commitment to public service, tangible commitment to peaceful defense of our values in democratic order. And young people have to be aware of the history of our country, where we're coming from. We must teach them the history of our country and not deny them that history. Because that history summons a collective commitment to reimagine a better country, to better the lives of our people. And so young people are angry, they're yearning for new things, they are reimagining their lives. In the era of the internet and the World Wide Web, you cannot anymore close people's minds. People are going to yearn for new things. You must allow for innovation, for young people to take charge of the country and be able to understand that this country came from somewhere and has to go somewhere. We're handing to them a delicate egg because every generation must do better than the past.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, what does it mean for those who are in power, who are in the positions to make the decisions, as you say, to preserve this, as you called it, egg for the younger generation? What is the message? What are our expectations?
When history judges this generation of people who are in charge of public affairs in this country at different levels, history will ask what they did to leave this place a better place, what they did to prepare the country for the future. And I think the message is clear that the future of this country is here. I tell a joke about people telling me you are the leaders of the future. They told me this when I was a young boy. They're telling this to my daughter now. When is that future? The future is now, and young people have to be interested and involved in public life and in shaping that future. And that those in charge of the management of public affairs must realize the impatience of youth. And that impatience has to be harnessed if we are to ensure that we have a stable country. But we also must have an honest discussion about the future that we are going to have. Are we going to have a future where we have the same education system we had in the past, or we prepare the young people for a better future? A competitive country must invest in that innovative energy of the youth and instill in them the values of public service, to mentor young people to be able to take this country forward. Without mentoring, without involvement of young people, we will be ruining the future of our country. I think young people represent that future, and they have to build it now.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicholas, very much. And again, it's impressive how the young Ugandans have contributed with their art performances to our today's topic. And for the most of them, I believe it was the very first time to get in touch with this piece of history. So we started running their videos on our different platforms, and we started a voting procedure to name and to find those performances that were loved by the audience.
This commemorative program is a cooperation between Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, KAS, and Goethe-Zentrum Kampala. Freedom, justice, and solidarity are the basic principles underlying the work of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, a German political foundation working in Uganda and South Sudan. On the other hand, Goethe-Zentrum Kampala brings to the table the aspect of culture, arts, and language. This local NGO is strengthening and promoting the growth of bilateral cooperation between Uganda and Germany. As part of these commemorative events, several artists were invited to showcase their interpretation of these events that are still relevant today. Let's take a look.
I realize art is sort of a catharsis for so many problems that we have. Art is always the voice of the voiceless. Not very many people know how to say these things in an entertaining way or in a calm way. And so how does art fit into this scene? It's in the fact that there's no boundaries with art. There's no boundaries with art, and with art you can get to actually speak to every individual accordingly. With politics, there are so many political jargons that not so many youth are interested in. But then when you bring it in an artistic way, when you bring it in a way that is entertaining, if I put up a show and say, you know, I'm going to do some dance and then some poetry, and then people will want to come through and listen to it. So art has been known to settle issues, to bring out issues in a way that everybody, even a child, even a youth, even somebody who's not really interested in the subject can pay attention because it's entertaining.
Hello, my name is Mercy Geno Apache, and I will be presenting a piece called I Know Walls. I know walls. Walls created to provide shelter and safety, to divide rooms and create privacy. Walls created in our hearts after love failed us. to shield us from empty promises, barriers for the sake of our mental grace. I know walls created to keep out enemies. The Hadrian's Wall of the Roman Empire, the Great Wall of China, etc. But the Berlin Wall was different. A zigzagged construction stretching for about 100 miles for the sole purpose of separating citizens that speak the same language but share different ideologies. Dividing the economies of the East and the West, plunging a unitedness into waste. By Willy Brandt, a wall of shame. By me, a Cold War wall of painful fame. In 1961, with stones and bricks, jacks and hammers, shredded glasses and barbed wires, freedom of movement was abused. In 1961, watchtowers and guard dogs, tripwires and orders, shoot to kill, guns to civilians, families were separated in 1961. Hot air balloons and submarines hiding under trunks of cars, taking wedding vows from across boundaries, jumping from apartment windows of 5 stories, refugees crossed to the west. In the struggle between superpowers, they forgot that walls can exist for years, but a human life only has one chance. A chance left in the hands of a survivor in 1989 whose son's whereabouts is not yet accounted for. A chance for past agonies to be kissed with sips of beer, for laughter to finally be loud and clear. A chance celebrated at midnight of 1981 by survivors whose memories of loss were muffled by aching people hammering away at chunks of the wall. The wall, a present-day tourism wall, still smeared with bullet holes, plastered with acts of loss, among us which the biggest question, is the war really over? Thank you.
Over 60 years ago, storytellers, poets, and natives tell a story. It is a tale of a cold war between two wives sharing a husband. Like a breakable plate, Berlin was once divided. The West Berlin was the other woman, loved by the husband. She was prosperous and kind to those who lived there. The East Berlin was the other woman, ignored by the husband. Full of rage, she held her children with a rough hand, and therefore they always ran off to the other woman to enjoy what she had to offer. The land was left void of skill, and poorer it became. One night, while the world snored away, she built a wall. East Berlin built a wall to keep her children from going to the other woman, to keep the aroma from the other woman's kitchen from her own. The malice of the other woman called it the wall of shame, and writers called it the Berlin Wall. A mother was divided from her son, a father from his daughter, a lover from his mate. A wandering boy was left homeless. Berlin was divided away. Ekisenge kitwabula jangu wansi. Ekisenge kitwabula jangu wansi. Ekisenge kitwabula jangu wansi. Ekisenge kitwabula. Oh, ekisenge. Oh, ekisenge. One day, when the people had had it all, they marched their way to freedom. The cage broke loose. Their wrath and rage shook the might walls, and the wall crumbled down and down it came. The mother found her son, the father his daughter, the lover his soulmate, the wandering boy found a home. Oh, Echisenge. Oh, Echisenge. Chisenge, 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 oh, oh, oh. Jangu wasi.
sekendi asatu.
Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in.
Freedom, prison, killing people for no reason, separating families from them kids and them loved ones for political reason. Someone trying to show how they got a bigger ego, slowing down progress, leaving scars in the minds and the hearts of the people, damaging properties, making people savages, no traveling, wasting time, money on dividing one nation. What you trying to prove though? Propagating fear into people, superpowers creating cold wars, keeping people behind the walls, causing mob wars, economic downfall, social strain, labor export, death strips, political unrest, minefields, dogs and machine guns, barbed wires, checkpoints, just to keep people from freedom. Put an iron curtain, then you put a prison upon the people. Hey.
The last days of communist East Germany.
hundreds of thousands of people gathered on East Berlin's biggest square, Alexanderplatz, to demonstrate for freedom, in particular the freedom to travel.
Freedom, freedom over prison. Put the walls down, let them people have freedom. Freedom, freedom over prison. Put the iron curtain down, let them people have freedom. Freedom, freedom over prison. Put the walls down, let them people have freedom. Freedom, freedom over prison. Put the walls down, let them people have freedom. Freedom, freedom over prison. Put the iron curtains down, let them people have freedom. Freedom, freedom, put the walls down, let them people have freedom. Freedom, reunite mothers to their daughters, fathers to their sons, husbands to their wives, brothers to their sisters. People traveled all over the world. Nothing is compared to be free, even if you're given everything. Think about it before you go be about it. Choose the powers to give people power. Are it just the laws, make them favorable to the citizens to protect the future?
Private travel outside the country can now be applied for without prerequisites, conditions, or family relationships. Permits will be issued on short notice.
Freedom, freedom over prison. Put the walls down, let them people have freedom.
Congratulations to our artists. I need to mention that the first placed artist will receive a German course at the Goethe-Zentrum Kampala, and the three best placed ones will have an opportunity to perform also during the Kampala Geopolitics Conference that is organized by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation together with the French Embassy and other partners from Uganda and outside of the country. I would like to also thank our panelists today. First of all, dear Dr. Anna Kaminsky, thank you very much for joining us from Berlin. Again, our apologies for the technical problems and that we could not see your presentation. I will be very happy to share parts of this presentation on our social media channels as well. And thank you, of course, to my guests here in the studio, to the Deputy Chief of the Mission at the German Embassy Kampala, Mr. Hans von Schröder. Thank you very much for joining our panel today. And thank you, Nicolas Opio, for being here with us and for sharing your perspectives here, insights, and to both of you and also to Anna, thank you for sharing this notes of hope and the messages of peace and of peaceful struggles for the cause of democracy. Thank you very much for being with us today and have a good evening. Thank you.
And there you have it. From me, Songa Samuel Stone, here in the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Let's remember that at a time when we're seeing a rise in nationalism amid a global pandemic, that is another reason for more walls and restriction. Now more than ever, we need less walls and more cooperation. Bye for now.